A constitutional convention, yes or no? A constitutional convention, convention of states, or a CONCON are different names for the same thing. Each different name is used to accommodate different people and hide the truth that the goal is a completely new constitution. There are many individuals that have accepted that idea that a constitutional convention will control our out-of-control federal government. But would it really? Let's see what history has to say. We'll start with the Annapolis Convention in 1786. The Annapolis Convention was called to remedy defects of the federal government. It met as a national political convention from September 11 to 14, 1786 in Annapolis, Maryland. Only 12 delegates from 5 states arrived. At the time, under the Articles of Confederation, each state was largely independent from the others, and their national government had no authority to regulate trade or anything else. The final report of the convention was sent to Congress and the states. It asked support for a broader convention to be held the following year in Philadelphia. It expressed the hope that more states would be represented and that their delegates or deputies would be authorized to examine areas broader than simply commercial trade. It is unclear how much weight the convention's call carried, but the urgency of the reform was highlighted by a number of rebellions that took place all over the country. The Constitutional Convention of 1787 followed the Annapolis Convention, but it would have been held with or without the Annapolis Convention since there were so many national problems to be dealt with. It is interesting to note that several of the delegates to the Constitutional Convention in 1787 had a larger agenda, even though the specific instructions which were given by the Congress and their respective states were to do no more than amend the Articles of Confederation. When the Constitutional Convention began its deliberations, the delegates threw out all of the instructions and began forming a new document in total secrecy. They all bound themselves to reveal nothing to any outsiders. They went so far as to keep all of the windows closed, enduring the heat so that no one from outside could be privy to their discussions. All delegates honored this pledge, and what finally emerged was a completely new document. During the convention, Madison proposed that the Constitutional Convention was authorized to frame and propose an entirely new form of government. Other delegates changed that convention, charged that the convention had been called to merely amend the articles, not throw them out entirely in favor of a new one. Madison then argued that Congress had clearly authorized the convention to form a national and adequate government. Although it had only been explicitly instructed to accomplish this through alterations and provisions in the Articles of Confederation, he held that alterations and provisions alone would not be sufficient to achieve the national and adequate government. Therefore, the convention rightly decided that it was more important to create the proper form of government than to limit itself to merely amending the articles. After the convention, Madison argued that the great principles of the Constitution proposed by the convention are really just the expansions of the principles which are found in the Articles of Confederation. The problem with the articles was that the principles were too feeble and confined. All the new Constitution does, he argued, was to empower the government to govern effectively on these principles. Then Madison pointed to the fact that articles themselves were formed by a convention that was not explicitly authorized to do so. What mattered ultimately, according to Madison, is whether the plans offered are good advice. The proposed Constitution ought to be judged on its merits, not on the mere technicality of whether the convention was authorized to propose it. One of the many objections of the Anti-Federalists was that the Constitutional Convention had gone far beyond the authority granted to it by the states to amend the articles. Madison is essentially dismissing this criticism as a technicality. He acknowledges that the convention was not explicitly authorized to create an entirely new form of government, but asserts that the convention nevertheless acted in the best interests of the American people. Madison's argument is an appeal to pragmatism, common sense, and the greater good, and a rejection of the mere technicalities and overzealous quibbles. The summary of this whole thing is that once the delegates met, They claimed and actually did have authority to do anything they wanted. In fact, Madison pointed out that they went far afield of their instructions, but he then said that it really was for the good of the people. And he was right. But the fact remains that if the delegates had not been completely honest, with great character, the whole situation could have turned out completely different. We also find that when the Convention for the Articles of Confederation was formed, those individuals also abandoned their instructions and established whatever they wanted. That is the pattern, and the delegates cannot be controlled. If we empower a constitutional convention or a convention of the states, call it what you will, can we depend on the delegates that would attend that convention to be as trustworthy as Madison and his group were? Not on your life. They have an agenda already in place, with proposed constitutions already written. Some of these proposed constitutions have been written to place the power in the federal government. We would lose everything we have. A new government could be established that would place all of our rights under its control and then pass them out as it thinks best, rather than identify them as God-given rights as stated in the Declaration of Independence. And of course, the government could also take those rights away anytime it wanted. Many who are for the Constitutional Convention say that anything new would have to be ratified by 3/4 of the states. That's not true. The convention could easily provide a different ratification process, just as the Constitutional Convention at Philadelphia did. One of the proposals that is already written establishes a committee to do the ratification. A constitutional convention could destroy all of our liberties, as well as our nation. Do we really want to take that chance?